Hi there, my name is Newo, and I'm a techno artist based in Los Angeles. Today I'll be doing a tutorial on my track No Cap, which is off of my latest release, Techno Mixtape 2. And I'll be focusing mostly on the arrangement for this one and how I got from just a groove to an entire track. Because that's something, especially when I was starting out, I was able to make these cool loopy things, but not necessarily turn that into a record. Of course, it's a different approach when you're making just like DJ tool stuff that is specifically for a mix, specifically to be played on like that third deck or layered in with other records. But for this one, um, let me just show you real quick the from going in from the breakdown into the drop to kind of give you a foundation of what I'm talking about. Right. So let's go ahead and hide that and make that inactive. Now, this track is a track where I used a reference, and the reference would be a track by Sion, who he runs Octopus Recordings. He's one of my favorite artists. I just really like how original his sound is. And so what I did is I loaded it into Pro Tools. I matched the BPM, and then I just started going through it and looking and seeing where did the drums come in and out? Where do the hi-hat, where does the hi-hat come in and out? Where is the breakdown? Just how is this track developing over time? And then in Pro Tools, just made corresponding markers. So let's start with the kick and snare, because this is that sort of electro techno, and the rhythmic elements on this kind of stuff are usually pretty open, which gives room to breathe for things. Room to breathe is something I'll expand on later in the tutorial. But let's just go ahead and play the kick and snare. And then, of course, there's hi-hats. Right, but as you can hear that, it's a very simple drum groove. So how do we keep that drum groove moving before we even add the lead bass? Well, one way we can do that is you'll see here, there's some automation going on, which is this snare send. And it's a spring reverb that has some distortion as well as just a little boost on 10K. So it's kind of like a gated reverb. And then here, the same thing, it just tails off more. So those are two things that just keep the beat, that snare, specifically how it's coming in at the end of a phrase, it just signals that there's more things coming. So another way we can do that to signal to the listener is with some snare rolls. Very simple. And you can do triplets or different rhythmic grooves, but I just kept it really simple. So now that we have that, let's go ahead and bring in the bass. Right, and so as you can see, there's this little breakdown going on here, and the snare cuts out because this is the bass's chance to kind of like introduce itself. Because even though it comes in the beginning, it makes more of a statement. It makes more of a statement when you have like that, I guess, clash of like a lot going on to less going on. And One way that we, for the bass, one of the first ways I avoided getting out of that just initial loop is with some automation. And I can't really stress enough how important automation is to an arrangement. So the bass instrument, because of course it's really just one note that's being played. And especially if you're just playing one note, you really want to prevent that from being stagnant. So the expand instrument, which right now is frozen in Pro Tools, but that has some automation going on here, as well as some delay automation, which sounds like this. And I'll just play the bass for that one. And then you hear that roll coming in as well. So what that is the verify, and I just did some editing with that. Now, you might ask, why is there this little gap? And that goes kind of the same concept with the snare roll. It's like a kick roll. So let's play that. Yeah, and so that just fills in that space. And that's kind of what a lot of arrangements are too. It's like having a balance between, you don't want to have like too much empty space, but at the same time, you don't want to have things be too busy. And sometimes when I'm producing, I'll actually have more elements. And then as I'm listening back to the record, I'll even just remove things, kind of going back to that whole less is more approach. So that's a part that signals to the listener that the main, as it says here, the first chunk, like the track is just introducing itself. And then we have a breakdown. So you can hear some more automation going on with the bass on the breakdown. But of course, going back to what I was saying about space, the kick, even though the kick rolls for a little bit during part of that breakdown, it does cut out. And on the other breakdowns as well, there's no drums. So we want to make sure that we're keeping that wall of sound going. And a way that we can do that is with things playing off of the note that the bass is playing. So we have this pad, which has been rendered out. And so that adds just some more harmonic depth to it. And then during the second half of the breakdown, it goes up an octave. And as you can hear right now, it's still kind of thin. So another way we can fill that in is with the choir. And I went with the choir on this because choirs just have that really dramatic feel. And especially since the beat is about to come in really hard, you want to have tension and tell the listener that this is, it's worth waiting for. It's going back to that movie analogy of like, you can't just go right into the crazy action scenes. The crazy action scenes in a movie, they mean more when there's context. So think of these layers as like context for the drop, especially how it goes up an octave. Like when you have that sort of duality of a really high frequency and then it cuts into low frequency, those low frequencies sound more powerful. And then there's also the perks on here. And the perks, I guess they're more of like a drum thing, but as you'll hear, there's a lot of automation on those as well. So it's weird because even though it has that like rhythmic feeling, it with the automation, it turns into like an effect. And that's kind of what I'm getting to is like it's having sounds that remain consistent, but they morph over time. So like they're not, when they do come in, when that automation does come in, it's not unfamiliar to the listener because the sound has already been present. It's just a different version of it. Another thing too is like having the delays trail off. it kind of eases you back into the loop, because if you cut things super hard, it can be effective, such as on that snare, but there is a benefit to having things more fluid like that. So on the other breakdown, I have those same elements, but I introduced a riser. And going back to that character analogy, movies, like, they'll have people that might only be in the film for a short time, but they have an important part. And that's the analogy. That's kind of the approach with this riser, is like, it's not in any other part of the track except for this breakdown, but it has a very important part because, like I was saying, it sets up the next scene, if that makes sense. Because the riser is coming in at the same time that the automation on the lead bass starts to get really nuts. And so that, combined with the same stutter effect, because you'll see here, I did the same thing where I trimmed out just a very short part of the bass so that then the kick drum would have time to do that stutter. So all of that, like, let's go ahead and play whatever's soloed already. Yeah, so, okay, so let me show you that riser. And that bass, that bouncy distortion effect is coming from Filter Freak, which is a personal favorite of mine. And as you'll see here, there's two Filter Freaks. One is what you're hearing here, and then the other one, where is that? Oh, you know what? It's more prominent over here. Yeah. So how that has like a slower filter going on, that's coming from the other Filter Freak. Now, going back to the importance of space. So we have, like, the drop in the track, the more crazy part, but then how do we go from that really crazy part of the track back to something that is more DJable and blendable? And the way we can do that is with the automation, starting to taper off, but also providing more space so that it's not as overwhelming. And that's why we have the drums cutting out. And it's a nice contrast as well, kind of how I was saying earlier with the the really low and really high frequency. So this vocal track is usually sitting in a pretty high frequency range, but it starts out low passed, and then it comes in more. And that's another thing, is going to the, I guess, changing of sounds. We have this loop. It's just a loop that I've cut and played over and over. But then on the breakdowns, more of that sample comes in, just to add some variation. So really, for this track, it was just the arrangement was the result of a couple things. It was the result of the reference track, starting with it, and then from that reference track, starting a groove that I really liked. And then from that groove that I really liked, experimenting with automation and seeing, really just tuning different knobs and trying different things and seeing what I liked that I could then incorporate into those markers. And then from there, really just building upon what already exists. So it's like we start out more simple, kind of expand upon it, go back to simple a little bit, and then expand upon it more, go completely crazy, and then tone it back down until you get to the mix out. And yeah, with arrangements, this track in particular is one approach I've taken towards arrangements, but sometimes I'll just completely freestyle the arrangement. So it's not always as intentional as this. Like sometimes it's just the result of like nothing but experimentation. Because this record in particular was something I went into with, I kind of already had an idea of what I wanted to make, but I would say 2/3 of the tracks that I make are really just by accident. You know, you'll have that moment where you're experimenting and you're just like, whoa, that feels good. And I've said this before, music is just a feeling. So if it feels good, you really shouldn't fight that. If anything, you should expand upon that, because if you feel it, that means at least one other person is going to feel it. And when you're at events, listening to music live, the stuff that is the feelings that translate the best are the ones that are not that complicated. So that's why on this record I don't have too much drum stuff going on. It's mainly just a couple very solid core elements, because you want to keep things as simple as you can get away with, if that makes sense. So I guess regarding that, if there's any questions about this this track, please feel free to reach out. My Twitter is TAPNEWO. My Instagram is TAPNEWO Techno, Tapnewo Techno. Yeah, definitely send me an email. My email is tapnewomusic@yahoo.com. And thank you for checking out this tutorial today. I really appreciate it. Have a good rest of your day.